So let me just spotlight myself a second. So good afternoon, everyone. As Ryan has said, my name is Pete. I'm the director of a company called IntroTweet. We are based in the Southwest, so we've got offices in Taunton and Exeter, and I'm a head of training as well. So I'm going to be taking you through all three of the sessions that we've got coming up, first of which is today. I think Ryan has talked you through all the logistics, so I won't go into any more detail on that, apart from just to say, as Ryan touched on, if you've got questions, please do chime in. Don't feel you need to wait till the end, but I will try and make sure there is some time. But if you've got questions as we go through, please use the chat function, which I'll be monitoring. And also do feel like you can sort of dive in and ask a question in person, so to speak, if you'd like to do that as well. So we've got three sessions that we've got penciled in. First of which is today is focusing on social media content specifically. So it's not massively technical today. It's much more about the theory of what makes great content, what the differences are with content between different platforms, for example. We're going to talk about things like video content, which is something that everyone sort of gets a little bit stuck with at times, and hopefully break down some of the barriers that you might have and some of those feelings that most people have with their social media platforms, which is, how do I get engagement? Everything I can talk about is boring. No one's going to be interested in this. All of the sort of things that we all say to ourselves when we're creating social media content. Hopefully I'm going to sort of knock down a few of those walls today as we go through. So I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a presentation which I'm going to be using as we go through. I will send this over to Ryan as well, so he can distribute it out to you guys. So you will have access to this. Obviously, please make as many notes as you want to do so, but you will have the recording and you will have the presentation as well. So don't necessarily feel like you need to be sort of glued to everything. Hopefully you can all see my presentation. Can you all see that at the moment? Yeah, lovely. Okay, great. So let me just scoot my way through. Okay, so one of the first things I just wanted to touch on with this, as we go through today, obviously there will be different elements that I'm looking at. Sorry, can everyone still see my presentation okay? No, it's gone. Sorry, I thought that didn't look right. Bear with me 2 seconds again. Joys of technology. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you guys can all see that okay now. Okay, so first thing I wanted to talk about, before I start dropping some theory on you and some different things that we know work really well and some of our software that we recommend and things like that, is I wanted to just talk to you about the importance of analysing what you're already doing. Now, this particular section, as with almost everything we're going to be looking at today, is relevant whichever platforms you're using. So if you're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, it doesn't matter which platforms you're using. Everything we talk about today is relevant for all of those platforms. And this is very much the case here as well. One of the mistakes that people sometimes make is not taking the time to have a look at your current performance or your past performance, because there are stats built into all of the social media platforms that will tell you which things are working really well and which things perhaps aren't working quite so well. So that's a really important starting point when you're trying to think of new content ideas. Use the data you've already collected to figure out which things are working well and which things aren't working quite so well. So straight away, a couple of screenshots for you. So Meta, which of course used to be called Facebook, Meta now incorporates Facebook and Instagram together. And there is a piece of software that you may or may not have seen previously, which is called Meta Business Suite. Now, this is a Facebook, I would say, but Meta piece of software, which allows you to analyze both Facebook and Instagram from one screen. Now, if you've never heard of this before, just go into Google and type in Meta Business Suite, and it will log you into your version of it using your Facebook logins. Now, from here, you can view all of the stats associated with your Facebook page and your Instagram account at the same time, which is something which can be really useful, being able to do it all from one screen as and when you want to be able to. Okay, just that here. So what we're looking for, the screen you've got an example of here, we're talking about things like reach, but also things like who your audience is, which is really useful information to know about. This screenshot on here is a bit more specific to Instagram. So this is what it looks like if you go into the stats on Instagram from your phone. The stats on Instagram have got immeasurably better. So if you looked at them a year ago and thought, well, these are a bit rubbish, I won't bother using these again, that probably will have changed. They're much, much better now than they used to be. And you can access all sorts of stats like these on Twitter as well, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, any platform you're using, you can access stats that will tell you the answer to some of these questions, which are the important ones that really I want you to take away and look at after today's session. So what type of content is the most successful? Is there a difference between the platforms? So is it that something works really well on Facebook but not on Instagram, for example? Almost in some ways, more importantly, what type of content is the least successful for you? Now, this is important because one of the big things that we're always thinking about as a group and when we're using social media for our businesses is time. You know, we don't have time to spend hours every day doing this. So the big thing we don't want to be doing is spending time doing something that the stats are telling us isn't going to work or isn't necessarily relevant. So making sure that you filter out over time those things that aren't really working for you is an important step as part of your presence. A really key question, and the answer to this you'll know by the time we finish this hour's session today, is do you notice a significant difference between promotional content and more personable content? So do you get a lot more engagement on personable content than you do on promotional? Some of you will know the answer to that already, but if you don't, you will do by the time we finish this hour. Also need to be thinking about things like live content. So by that, I mean things like stories on Instagram, reels on Instagram, live tweeting of events on Twitter, or X, as I need to now get into the habit of calling it, unbelievably. So again, whichever platforms you're using, there are different versions of live content. I will be talking about all of these things over these 3 sessions. So if I mention something like reels and you don't know what they are, I will go through that, not necessarily today in loads of detail, but over the course of these 3 sessions, everything I mentioned will be covered. And also the last part on here, don't be afraid to explore what your competitors are up to. It's not copying, it's not stealing, it's just sort of keeping an eye on, and I say competitors, they don't have to be competitors as such. They can just be other businesses who have a similar audience to you. Look at what sort of content they're sharing. Look at how often they're posting. What is it you notice? What things are working well? What things are going flat? Because that's all information that you can then take in and utilize for your own platforms as well. It's a good habit to get into. The main point I would make just with that little section is analyze your performance as you go and use it to get better, to improve what you're doing all the time. Personally, I would say don't get too hung up on the numbers themselves, but then I'm not a massive numbers man, so I always sort of would say that. But the key is that you learn from it. Every time you look at your stats, you should do 2 things differently for the next month. If you do that every month for a year, suddenly your social media presence is going to be transformed, but it's all done in a sort of data-driven way. So those stats are all there for you. Don't ignore them. Use them as a starting point to help you with developing a new social strategy. Okay. Any burning questions on the stats before I move past that and get to the more fun bits? No, that's lovely. That's fine. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the recommended software that we utilize every day. Alongside training, we also do management where we run people's accounts for them. And I think as a team at the moment, we've got about 55 clients, I think. So these are the softwares that we use every day to try and help us create interesting visual content for clients, because the visual is always going to be the key element to any social media content that you're putting together. Yes, the copy matters and what you write and include in there does matter, but it's always, the visual is worth 80% of the quality of the post. So one of the things we're always trying to think about is how can I do something more interesting? How can I create something that's got some movement or that's nicely branded or whatever it is you're trying to do with it? The best way to do that is to give yourself the tools to do it. And that will make it much easier for you to be creative and to come up with new ideas. So these are the things that we use, a few suggestions on here, and I'm sure you'll have a few of your own as well. Now, everything I'm going to share with you is free. A lot of it can be done from your phone. Most of the things I talk about, they do have paid options, but you don't necessarily need to utilize them. So in theory, everything we talk about today can be done for free. Canva is a fantastic platform that I'm sure a few of you may have heard of or may be using regularly already. It's basically a free graphic design website, and it's very simple to use. It has fantastic templates that you can upload your own colors into, upload your own fonts. You can use it for video editing as well now, and to create things like Reels for Instagram. It is undoubtedly the one piece of software that if you're not using, you should be. If somebody came to me and said, I want to do social media content, I need one thing to help me do it, what should it be? Canva would be the biggest recommendation that I would have. It allows you to create videos and photos that are exactly the perfect size. You can do some sort of editing of those particular photos and videos with cropping, brightness, filters, all of those sorts of fun things. It's a fantastic piece of kit. You can use it from your phone, so there is an app that goes with it, but I would recommend generally using it on a computer. It's a bit fiddly from your phone, but it is a fantastic sort of piece of software that I use for probably, I don't know, probably 90% of my content I use Canva for one way or another. A couple of examples for you just from here. So testimonials and feedback and reviews, for example, or quotes in this case, are a really good use for it. You can see with these particular graphics how we've got the branding on there. We've got the key colors from that branding being replicated throughout. So it's a really good way, for example, if you're running specific campaigns, you may have a specific color or font associated with that. You can upload that into Canva and you can keep creating graphics and videos that have that branding etched into them. The other example is for a specific event, so you get to put all those key elements into there and then upload your own photos if you want to do so. And then the example on the left is a reel that's been put together using Canva. Obviously, you can use Instagram itself to do this, but this is another example as well. So the templates are all there ready for you. You don't need to be a brilliant designer to use Canva. They've done all the hard work for you. They've created the templates. All you've got to do is come into here and populate it. Get the key information into there. Can't recommend it enough. Those of you that are already using it, I'm sure will agree that it's fantastic. Those of you that aren't, definitely something to have a good look at and start having a play with. Okay, so I want to talk to you about boomerang videos. Now, these have been around for a while, so there's a good chance a few of you have come across these before, but this is the first example of a really quick and easy and free way of creating video content. Video content is probably the thing we get asked about the most as time goes through. So there is a perception sometimes with video that in order to do it, you have to pay somebody thousands of pounds and it takes 6 months for it to be done. Now, obviously, there is, there is a sort of call for that sort of content. There's nothing wrong with getting really good quality video content produced at all, but that doesn't mean it should stop you creating your own video content on a more day-to-day basis. So Boomerang is a really good and quick and easy way to help you get started with this. So it's a free app for your phone. Originally, it came through on Instagram, and what it creates for you are short repeating videos. So there's a couple of examples on screen for you here. So one, we've got the Loom, which is was made for Boomerang. It's the perfect Boomerang video. And then another example on the left here, which is just of Laura, who's my fellow director when we were speaking at an event. Rather than just taking a static photo, because we've used Boomerang, it gives the whole visual a little bit of movement. What it also means is when we upload this onto the social platforms, whether that's Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever it might be, it counts as video content, and therefore the algorithms kick in. The algorithms on all of the platforms want you to be sharing video content. So if you can find ways of doing that quickly and easily without it being something that's sort of stressful and difficult for you to do, then that's a real bonus to your content strategy, because the platforms want you doing it. And if you, as a good general rule of social media content, if you do what the platforms want you to, then they will reward you. And the way they reward you is by showing your content to more people. If you don't do the things they want you to, they cut down the number of people that see everything you do. So this is a really good example, Boomerang, of a quick and easy way of creating video content from your phones, and it's costing you nothing. Now, in particular, if you've got things like sports sessions taking place or anything along those lines, you've always got movement. Boomerang is something that could work really well. I'm sure some of you will have played with it before, but it's a really interesting platform, and it's something that can add something, especially if you're doing things like creating reels and so on. Okay, now PhotoGrid is another example I just want to talk about. Now, this is used a little bit less in recent times because of the success of reels, but what it allows you to do, those of you that use Instagram a lot will probably have used Layout, which is and things like Pic Collage, which are apps that you can use to help you create collage effects for posts. Now, PhotoGrid allows you to do exactly the same thing, but it allows you to create collages that include videos within them as well. So rather than just 4 photos, you could have 3 photos and 1 video, for example. Or you could have like an example here that we've got, which is 4 videos in 1. So this is just one post, but it's made up of 4 different videos. Great way to do something a bit more interesting, something that's definitely going to catch people's eye, which is what we're always trying to do. And also, I think PhotoGrid in this case is a really good way of sort of telling a bit of a story. So if you've got an event running, if you've got a session that you're doing that runs the course of an afternoon or something like that, this is a way of you showing multiple elements to that within one post, which I think is something that can work really well. So this is PhotoGrid, which again is just an app that you can get for your phone or your tablet. We're always trying to think of ways of doing different things. That's the most important way of looking at this. How do I do something that's a little bit different? Things like PhotoGrid allow you to do that. You're not going to use it every day, but it is something that's worth having in your arsenal, ready to use as and when you think appropriate. Time-lapse videos I wanted to mention, just make sure I turn the sound off. I am on something of a personal mission to get people using time-lapse video more than they are currently. I think time-lapse videos are fantastic. So this is one example of it. Basically, a time-lapse video is a video that's been sped up. So classic example that we see lots is the Northern Lights. Whenever you see a video of the Northern Lights, that's normally done with time-lapse. And there's another example on screen here. There's a few reasons why I think time-lapse videos are so useful and something that we should all be looking at and considering using. First of which is that we can all do them for free from our phones. So if you've got a phone that's relatively new, and by that I mean the last 2 or 3 years, hidden within the settings of your camera somewhere will be the ability to do time-lapse videos. It'll just be one of the settings that's in there. It'll either be called time-lapse or hyperlapse. Now, so we all have access to do this. We don't need any special equipment. We don't need extra cameras or anything like that. All we need is our own phones. So that's a massive tick straight away because that makes it quick and easy for us to do. The other reason I think they're brilliant is just because they are something different. Again, if you imagine how you guys use social media when you're flying through your home feeds, what is it that makes you stop? Now, it's often going to be video. And even if it's not video, it will be something that's a little bit different. And time-lapse definitely falls into that category. So if you're running sessions, if you're setting up for events, anything that you're doing, time-lapse is something that could potentially work really well. The other joy of time-lapse is that it takes very little effort on your part. So all you need to do essentially is set it up and leave it running and then go and do whatever it is that you're doing. So if you're running a training session, for example, all you need to do is set your phone up on a stand ideally, but if not, just wedge it up however you can, hit go, and then off you go. You go and do what you're doing. It takes an hour, takes a couple of hours, whatever it is. You come back, your phone's still there, you hit stop, job done. The video, the camera, the phone has done all the work for you while you're doing what you were already doing anyway. So it's free to use, it's easy to use, it's quick to use, and it's something different and it's something engaging. Again, it's also video content, which is what we're always looking for ways to produce. So I think time-lapse is brilliant, massively underused, always something that does draw in engagement. So it's worth having a think through the diary, whatever it is, and thinking what sort of things could we use this for? Because it is a really good one. Okay. So time-lapse is one example. The flip side of time-lapse, of course, is the complete opposite, which is slow motion. Kill the sound on that. Again, slow motion very much falls into the same category as time-lapse in the sense that you can do it from your phones for free, quickly and easily. So that's what this whole section is about, really, is finding ways of giving you some tools that you can use that aren't going to take hours out of your day, that don't need loads of technical expertise, and that you don't have to spend any money on. And time-lapse is one, slow motion is the other. Slow motion can be a bit harder sometimes to find ideas for or to find ways of using it. But in essence, if you've got something happening that has any movement taking place, slow motion can work. And again, we're just trying to think of something different, trying to think of ways of making sure that our social media strategy and our content strategy doesn't go stale. We want to be doing different things and introducing variety as much as possible. Talk about why. I'll talk about why a little bit more later, but that's what we're always looking for. So time lapse is one great way of doing this. Slow motion is another one. So anything with movement, slow motion works brilliantly. And again, it's free to use and you can do it from your own phone. Okay, so just building on the sort of concept, if you like, of using your phones, there is another piece of software as well, which we use. If you are someone who likes to use your phone generally for your social media content, rather than getting a computer out or a laptop out. This is an app called InShot, which allows you to do lots of video editing from your phone quite easily and quickly. So if you prefer to use your phone for things and you want to do any video editing from there, so you want to change the shape of it, you want to crop it, you might want to trim it down, you might want to join 2 or 3 videos together, this is the best app that we would recommend for doing that. You can also use Canva to do that, but if you prefer working from your phone, this is the one that we would recommend. And one of the last things I just want to mention as well is another app that used to be synonymous almost completely with Instagram, but actually is something that can be useful anywhere now. This is an app called Panorama Crop. You can see with the logo, you can tell by the colors that are on there that it was specifically for Instagram originally. And those of you who use Instagram a lot, this is a good one. What it allows you to do is to take a panoramic photo that you might have taken. So you can see the example on screen here is a panoramic picture of the Eiffel Tower. And by uploading that picture into Panorama Crop, it will crop it for you into perfect squares, which can then be used for a swipeable post on Instagram. If you don't use Instagram a huge amount and you're not sure what I'm talking about, don't worry. In the next session, when we look at Instagram, I will go into more detail about swipeable posts. But for those of you who do use Instagram a lot, swipeable posts on Instagram are up there with Reels as the best performing type of content. So if you are at an event, if you are running sessions, whatever it is you might be doing, if you have the ability to take a great panoramic photo and then chop it up in this way, again, it's something different. It's something that you don't see that often, and it will draw in more engagement than your average post. You can do panoramic photos of this type. You can do on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And you can do them on Facebook if you are doing any paid advertising, but not if you're not paying for it. So can be a really good way of doing something a little bit different, which is what all of these apps are for. So my big advice really in that sense is not to sit here and think, right, I'm going to be doing a boomerang video every morning, and then I'm going to be doing a time lapse every afternoon. You know, that's not going to be how it's going to work. But the more of these tools you have to hand and the happier you are using them, the easier it is to be creative. You know, if you're running sessions, if you're attending events, if you know you've got all of these things on your phone and you've practiced with them and had a bit of fun with them, you will start to spot content ideas and you'll start to do things that you wouldn't have done otherwise. So all of those different individual apps, well worth having a look at, well worth having a play with. Some of them will be on your phone already. Those that aren't, get them uploaded onto there. They're all free, and start, experimenting with them and get creative, because what we're looking to do all the time is something different. It's the key thing that we need to introduce to our content, and I will explain more about why as we go through. So just as a question come in on the chat, I just want to make sure I don't miss that. Do you have to shoot in Boomerang, or can you edit a video afterwards using it? It's a really good question, and actually the answer has changed to that in the last 6 months. So it used to be that you would have to use Boomerang itself in order to get the boomerang effect. That is still largely true. So if you want to do a boomerang, really you need to do it live. However, there are other apps that you can now download that will add the boomerang effect to a video after you've done it. So I think one is called Boomerang It, off the top of my head, so it's not particularly creative, very similar. But ideally you want to use the app itself and do it at the time. If you can't, there are other ways of doing this as of relatively recently. If you are using Instagram, if you're doing stories, if you're doing reels, then you can use the boomerang effect live within those features as well. So there's a few different ways of going about it, but the safest, easiest way to do it is to use the app, and then it will save into the gallery of your phone, and then you can use that anywhere. Okay, so good question. Okay, so those are the apps and the sort of main bits and pieces that I wanted to share in terms of the recommended software and apps that we use on a day-to-day basis. If anyone has any other questions about those, please put them in the chat as we go through. But the more tools you have to hand, the easier it is to be creative. So get those downloaded and start having some fun with them. Okay, so I'm going to share some stats with you. I alluded at the start that I'm not a huge fan of numbers generally, but I think some of these stats are pretty good. Just to give you an idea of what sort of content most people are sort of driven to at the moment and what they tend to gravitate towards, because it does change And it's something that makes things difficult for the likes of yourselves when you're doing other jobs and you've got a million things to be doing. Keeping up with social media trends is quite difficult. You know, it's okay for me because it's my full-time job, so I can keep an eye on these things. But when you're doing other things, it's very hard to see what things have changed. So a few stats will hopefully help sort of solidify this for us. So one thing I want to talk to you about is live video. Now, you're going to hate me for bringing this up, I have no doubt, because everybody hates the concept of live video. But I'm going to have to talk about it. Live video is something that can be done across the platforms. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn now, as of the last year, you can do it on LinkedIn as well, TikTok as well. One of the big things the social media platforms like to do or want to do is produce content that they would describe as non-passive. So that what they don't want you creating is content where people don't have to do anything. People just see it and they go, that's good, and move on. That's not what the platforms want. They want content that people have a reason to engage with. So, for example, asking questions is a great thing to get into the habit of doing because it gives people a reason to come and engage with you by answering that question. Now, what will happen if the content you create is generally passive? The algorithms will stop showing your content to people. So not completely, but your reach, which is the number of people that see your posts, will go down and down and down and down. So we need to be thinking all the times about content ideas that are going to produce engagement and that are hopefully going to draw people in to conversation, because comments are the new gold standard of engagement. Now, it used to be that we were always looking for shares all the time. We're now looking for comments because what the platforms want is conversation. So how can we do this? How can we draw in comments? A lot of what I'll talk about in the next half an hour is going to sort of gravitate around that idea. But live video is a bit of a sort of starting point for this. Now, the difference between live video and pre-recorded video is that if I use an example, let's say I did a video which was 5 top tips for Instagram stories. If I do that as a pre-recorded video, when I upload that to the platforms, people can watch it and that's fine. But if somebody hears one of those points and says, oh, I've never heard of that before, I could do with knowing a bit more, they can't do anything. They can watch it, but their ability to engage with the post is relatively limited. So they could comment on it, but they don't know when that question is going to be asked. They don't know if it's being monitored. So that is good content and still worth doing, but it is veering into that passive element. Live video is different because what I'm essentially doing is streaming through my social media platforms. So if I do that same video and I do it through Facebook Live, for example, I get to my second point, which is if you want to do Instagram stories, make sure your photo is a portrait. Someone then asks a question and says, oh, I didn't realize that. You know, does that mean all my photos should be portrait or whatever? And because the video is live, I see that comment come through. I can then answer it and we're engaging in real time. So live video is the very definition of non-passive content, sort of content that people interact with and engage with, and therefore the sort of content that the social media platforms and the algorithms within them absolutely love. So I know everybody hates the idea of live video. I can't see all of you on screen at the moment. I'm sure people have dived under the desk and sort of shaking heads and all of those things that people normally do when I bring up live video. But if you can find someone who's up for doing it, it is something that's worth introducing on a regular basis. Now, by regular, I mean maybe every 3 or 4 weeks or something like that would be a perfect amount. It's brilliant for things like question and answer sessions. So it might be that you're launching a new initiative. It might be you've got new sessions that haven't been done before, and you could do a live video to go along with the launch of that where people can ask questions about it. There are lots of different ways that you can use it. It is brilliant. It is something that always works really well. Social media platforms love it. The algorithms love it. Your audience will love it. So if you can find someone who's happy to do it, pin that person down and keep using them to get this live video out there, because it is something that works really well. You can also use it for things like demonstrations. You can use it to pass on top tips. Lots of different ways that you can go about using it. And you can do that, as I said, on all the platforms. Facebook is where I think it goes down best. Twitter, I personally wouldn't worry about using it on Twitter too much. Instagram is another place where it can work really well. So some platforms it works a little bit better than others, but it is still something that's worthwhile everywhere. Couple of bits of advice if you are going to do some live video. Video needs to be at least 5 minutes long, and I would probably be sort of taking that towards the 10-minute mark as a minimum. The reason is one of the great things with live video is when you go live, the platform will notify everybody who follows you that you've done so. Now, it doesn't do that with your normal posts, but it does do it with live video. The danger, therefore, is if the video is too short, by the time people start coming over to watch it, the video is finished. So you want to be ideally at least 10 minutes long with it. And the other bit of advice is to make sure that people know it's coming. Don't just go live randomly on a Thursday afternoon because you're feeling the urge. You thought, right, this is it, let's do it. Get it in the diary. 2 weeks today, we're going live and we're doing a Q&A where we're talking about this initiative, whatever it is. And post about it organically, post on your other platforms about it. Make sure that people know it's coming. Okay. One other actually very quick piece of advice with live video. Make sure you haven't got the radio on in the background, because if there is any copyrighted music playing anywhere, Facebook in particular will mute the video automatically. And you may not realize that they've done it. So you'll end up delivering this brilliant video. You finally psyched yourself up to do live video, and then you find out afterwards the whole thing was muted. So make sure that the radio is well and truly turned off. Okay. Now, the reason I talked about live video is coming back to this particular stat that you can see here. So 80% of audiences would rather watch live video from a business than click through and read a blog. That's a relatively startling stat, and it should give us a really good idea of where people are moving towards in terms of how they like to take in their social media content. Nobody wants to read anything. Nobody wants to click through and read anything anymore. Now, that's a huge generalization, but it is pretty true. So what we need to be thinking about with our content as much as possible is how can we deliver to people all the content they need within this one post. That's one reason why video works so well, because you can say so much more over the course of a 60-second video than you can if you're using photos or graphics or lots of writing. So we need to be conscious of that trend. It's no good us just chucking content out that's 3, 4, 5 paragraphs long or saying, come and click through and read our blog, because some people will do it, but the majority won't. So we need to be making sure that our content is catering for most of our audience. And that's, again, why video can be so useful. Another interesting stat, if you are going to be using video regularly and the type of video you're using is sort of talky video, 85% of video on all the social media platforms is watched with the sound off. So if you are going to be doing videos, and they are going to be videos where someone is describing something or they're talking about something, an initiative or whatever it might be, you're going to need subtitles or you're going to need captions. Now, on Instagram and Facebook, they can do this for you. So when you're uploading a video, they should give you the option to add automatic subtitles to it. So just make sure that that option is being utilized. And also you may need to just double check it, because it can be a little bit like, you know, when they have the news on in a Wetherspoon sometimes and they have the subtitles going, and they can be a little bit hit and miss. It can be a little bit like that. So it's worth just double checking them before everything goes live, which you have the ability to do. Okay. User-generated content helps build trust in a brand. User-generated content is a posh phrase for saying clients, customers, people who are utilizing you and your services. Basically comes back to the sort of idea of it's all well and good you guys talking about how great you are at what you do or how great an initiative is, but if you can have other people saying it for you, that's immeasurably more powerful. So thinking about ways of introducing that sort of content and on a regular basis is something that should be part of what you're doing. So whether that's sharing other people's posts, whether that's sharing testimonials and reviews, whether it's getting a quick video of somebody while an initiative or a session or something is taking place, however you can do that, it does make a big difference. Infographics are a good one. If you have concepts that you're introducing that are relatively complicated, which can always be the case, Canva is brilliant because it has lots of little infographics built into it that you can utilize to help you get across those particular concepts. So that's definitely something to think about. The last bullet point on here is arguably the most important in some ways, and one that I really want you, hopefully you'll take more than this one thing out of today, but if you only take one thing from today, this last bullet point on here is something I'm going to talk about a bit more in a minute, is a really important one. So the stat that you can see here is saying that 40% more engagement on posts that have faces in the visual. People and the social side of your content is incredibly important. I'll talk about this more a little bit in a second, but we need to see people within your content. not just lovely graphics or lovely videos that have stock photos and things in. We need real people, authentic faces. And that tells you why immediately. 40% more engagement on a post if it's got someone's face in it. That's a huge amount. And if you're getting 40% more engagement, what that also means is you're going to be reaching probably 40 or 50% more people than you would be if that post didn't have a smiling face in it. So personality is hugely important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through this afternoon. Okay, so moving on from the stats side of it, I want to talk about some general themes that are worth considering when you're putting your content together as well. So we've talked a little bit about sort of software that you can use to create interesting content. Here's some good themes just to bear in mind with it as well. Giving something back to your audience, providing value. This has always been important with people's social media presence, but since lockdown, COVID, all of those fun and games, it's become even more so. And actually, one of the big shifts that we saw take place over that period was that people didn't want to be sold to on social media. Now, that's always been the case a little bit, but it definitely went up a level at that time when everything was going on. People were sat at home, couldn't leave the house and all these things. Like, I don't want to go on social media and have people flogging me products and services. I want something useful. I want something interesting. I want something that I might be able to utilize on a day-to-day basis. So providing value should be something that you should be considering integrating into your strategy. Now, depending on what you do, that will be easy for some of you, that will be harder for some of you. But things like top tips or advice related to what your specific area of expertise is, don't underestimate how interesting and useful people find these things. You won't think they're useful because you know it already, and it's what you do day to day. So you won't necessarily see that and think, oh, that's going to change people's worlds. But obviously that's because you know it. Lots of other people won't. So anything you can share with your audience that along the lines of top tips and things like that, it always goes down well, and it gives people a reason for following you that's not just being marketed to. And that's what we're always looking for. So anything you can introduce in that context is a really good idea, and that's become more important as time has gone on. Make sure that your social media activity as well, or your content in particular, is aligned with the reason that you're using social media, and also the wider goals within the business itself. Now, when I say this, I'll give a quick example. We had did a training with somebody once, and they said, you know, the reason we're using social media is to drive website traffic because we've just spent X amount on a new website and we're trying to get people through to it and get it active. So we went through and we said, okay, so it's not happening at the moment. Why isn't it happening? And the reason was that they weren't putting their website link into any of their posts. So the content's going out there, but people don't have the ability to click and action the thing that they want them to actually be doing with it. Now, that's a very simple example of something that's really easy to do because you haven't necessarily joined the two things together. You think, I'm doing social media and I'm doing business. Two things need to come together. So if you are trying to drive signups for something, obviously the nature of your content has to be geared towards that. You know, it doesn't all have to be promotional, but there has to be a clear call to action at the end of that post saying, click here to find out more, click here to sign up or book now. Or it needs to be done in a more subtle way throughout the post itself. However you go about it, make sure that whatever the reason is you're using social media, your content reflects this. As I say, it's easy for that not to be the case. In terms of those reasons, it's going to be things like brand awareness, website traffic, all of those sorts of things. But just make sure that's at the forefront of your mind when you're putting your content together. Most of the content you use can be used as it is on all the platforms at the same time. Now, there are people who do what I do who won't agree with that, but I'm going to explain why I think that's the case. And there is a caveat to that as well. So what I mean by this is you might create a Facebook post that's got 3 great photos and a little paragraph about an event that's taken place, for example. That post can also go on LinkedIn, that can also go on Twitter, it can also go on Instagram. The caveat to that is that the post has to be tailored for those platforms. Now, what I mean by that, if I give you an example straight away, let's talk about hashtags. Hashtags, for those of you who aren't totally comfortable with them, what hashtags allow you to do is they make it easier for your target audience to find you. So if I want to reach people in Exeter, when I'm doing a post on Instagram or Twitter, I would put hashtag Exeter. It makes it much easier for people in that area to come and find my content if they don't currently follow me. So that's what hashtags do. That's really all that they're for. Hashtags are incredibly important on Instagram and they're incredibly important on Twitter, but they're not on Facebook, for example. So although the post you do on Facebook can also go on Instagram, it will have to be tweaked because it will need to have those hashtags added to it. So although the content is the same, it will be tailored to those individual platforms. Now, over the next couple of sessions, we go into more technical detail on those platforms. So that point will make more sense over the course of the next couple of weeks as well. Another good example is that website links aren't clickable on Instagram, but they are on Facebook. So on a Facebook post, you would want your website link in it, but on Instagram, you wouldn't because people can't click on it. So the content can be the same, but just make sure that you've tailored it for those individual platforms. The other reason why that is true and valid, and perhaps it wouldn't have been a few years ago, is because it's so hard for us to reach people now on social media. It's the number of people we reach day to day is considerably less now than it was this time 4 or 5 years ago, because the algorithms are so much stronger now, and what the algorithms do is they reduce the reach of the people who see our content. So the chances of somebody seeing your post on Facebook and then seeing it on Instagram and then seeing it on Twitter on the same day, for example, are almost zero. There's very little chance that it will happen. So it's not something that we need to be worried about. It's important to remember this, because if you don't approach it this way, the danger is you end up creating different content strategies for each platform, which is very difficult to manage. You know, you could do it if it was your full-time job, you had nothing else to think about, you could do that. But if you're doing your social media as part of other things, you're not going to be in a position to create individual content strategies for each platform and then create different photos for each one and all of that. It's not possible. So having one content strategy that you use everywhere with some tweaks at times is the best way to approach it. Okay. And as I say, that will make more sense as we go through the technical side in the next couple of weeks. Including keywords and phrases. So I've just talked to you about hashtags. There are some key things that need to be included on certain platforms. So hashtags are the best example of this. You don't need them on Facebook. You do need them on Instagram. You do need them on Twitter. On Twitter, you probably want 3 to 5, I would suggest, would be a good place to start. And geography is a really good place to start with it. So if what you do is specific to the area, make sure that you've got a hashtag for the county, but also for the specific town or city that initiative or session might be taking place. So that's a really good place to start. On Instagram, the magic number of hashtags is 11 or more. You can have up to 30, but if you can come up with 30 relevant ones, good on you. I've never managed it. But 11 is where, according to the stats, 11 is the sort of tipping point where you go from having an average post to one that's going to perform better. Instagram is a really good example whereby if you don't use hashtags on Instagram, it's almost impossible for people who don't follow you to find your content. So the people who do follow you will see it. The ones who don't, very, very difficult for them to find you. So hashtags, keywords, all those sorts of things, they are important to include. It's more important on some platforms than others, but they are important. Again, I will go through some of this in more detail in the coming weeks. Video we've talked about already. The more video you do, the happier the algorithms are, the more people you will reach, the more engagement you will get. It's pretty much as simple as that. So thinking about different ways to introduce video should be at the forefront of your mind after today's session. And hopefully some of the tips that we've gone through will make it easier for you to do that. Showcase the people behind the business. This, again, has just been alluded to by me in the previous section. People buy from people, and social media is social by definition. Therefore, the more people you introduce and the more personality you introduce, the more engagement you will get, and therefore the more people you will reach. If you don't get engagement, you don't reach people. It's as simple as that. So what type of content can we create that produces engagement? Video is a great place to start, and then personality is the next best thing, or sits alongside video. Now, personality, I'll talk about this more before we finish off, but shouldn't be misunderstood for personal content. So it's not the classic example that everyone throws at me is, you know, why would I post about what I'm having for lunch? No one's interested in that, which they would be right if that's what they think. It's not an example of that. It's simply showcasing the people behind the business. So if you're a sports business and you've got sessions that you're running, a photo or a time-lapse video of the team setting up beforehand or a photo of the team, a team photo, ready to run the session. Here's our 3 coaches ready to go. Great example. It's still promotional because it's showcasing what you do and what you offer, but you've got human faces to it, and you've got authenticity, which I know sounds like a bit of a buzzword and I don't like to use them, but actually in this context is right. What we don't want is for everything to look fake and look too polished. We want something that feels real and authentic to people, because then they are much more likely to engage with it. So the more people and the more personality you introduce to your presence, the better. And right at the very start, we looked at stats, or I talked to you about the importance of looking at your stats. And one of the questions on there was, do you notice a difference in terms of how much engagement you get from personal content or promotional content? The answer will be personal content or personable content. No question that you will get immeasurably more engagement on posts that have got people in than on the more promotional content, which tells you everything you need to know. Okay, consistency is the last bullet point on here when it comes to themes. One of the big questions I get when it comes to content, but social media in general, is how often should I be posting? It's a good question. It's a difficult one. And my new answer is that I sort of cop out of it a little bit, which is to say it's not about a number of posts anymore. It's about consistency. Now, that can mean something slightly different for everybody. The absolute gold standard of social media content strategy would be posting something every day. Now, I fully appreciate that half of you will have just fallen off your chairs when I've said that, and that's not necessarily what I'm recommending. The key element and the key word, therefore, is consistency. So let's say, for example, that you've got the time and the capacity to do 3 posts a week. That's absolutely fine, as long as you post Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, for example. What you don't want to fall into the trap of doing is saying, right, I've got an hour on a Monday, I'm going to do 3 posts now and then nothing for the rest of the week. Because what we want to avoid are big gaps in our content. We need a nice stream of consistent content. And that might be something every day, that might be something every other day, it might be something every 3 days. It doesn't necessarily matter as long as it's consistent and it's coming through without big gaps in between. So how many posts you do is going to be up to you, and how much content you have available and how much time you have. The key word to have in your head is consistency. Now, one of the big things that can help you with this is that you can schedule content. So Meta Business Suite, I mentioned earlier on, allows you to schedule content on Facebook and Instagram. It's a piece of software called TweetDeck, and you can schedule from Twitter itself as well. And also LinkedIn, you can schedule content. So, you know, if you do have an hour a week, for example, for your social media activity, you can still schedule content to go out on different days to give you that nice consistent stream, which is really, really important. Okay. Which brings me to the last element that I'm going to discuss with you regards content today. So I've talked quite a lot as we've gone through about different ideas, trying to introduce variety, trying to make sure that we're not doing everything in the same way all the time. And this last element really just brings all that together into a bit more of a formula that hopefully you guys can use after today. So on your screen, what you should be able to see is a slide that's talking about the rule of thirds, which is something that we use for, excuse me, something that we use for ourselves and for our clients. And it's a great way of making sure that you have balance and variety to the social media content that you're sharing. Variety is incredibly important for a couple of reasons. Now, we've talked a lot about this as we've gone through about doing your posts in different ways. So slow-mo video, time-lapse, graphics, live video, that's one side of variety. The other side of it is actually what you're going to be saying, which is what this is referring to. But the reason variety is so important is because one of the things that the algorithms on all of the platforms hate above all else is repetition. So doing something in exactly the same way or posting about the same thing in the same format over and over again, the algorithms will immediately switch off from you very quickly. So what we're looking for is different ways of posting, which is something we've talked about quite a lot already, but also to make sure that we are talking about different things, that we're not just focusing on one type of content all the time, and that we have balance to what we do. It's also important because it will keep people engaged on a human level, and also people will follow you for different reasons. So using different types of content will mean that you're able to cater for a wider audience. So the rule of thirds is broken into these 3 sections. First of which, business news and promotion. So that's the easy one, because that's basically where you say, right, this is what we sell, these are our services, this is an event we've got coming up next week. All of those sorts of things that you're probably already doing fall into that first category. And as I say, that's the easy bit, really. The second third we call industry or local news. This is often a little bit trickier to come up with content for, but what we would classify this as is something that your audience would find interesting that isn't necessarily about you. So if I use myself as an example, if I saw a post that somebody had done where they had a post that they'd done on their page that had performed 1,000% better than anything else, I might share that and say, oh, great to see this post from Somerset Cricket that's done so well. Why do you think it's done so well? Something like that. It's not promoting my services. It's not about me, but it's still something that my audience would be interested in. So that's what that second third comes into. It might be that there's a BBC News story that's particularly relevant to what you do. You might share that and ask people for their opinions. So it's a bit trickier, that second one, but it is something that's really useful to introduce. In particular as well, if you have a local element to what you do, don't underestimate the importance of sharing local news. That's something that really does matter. So that's that second third. The last third, behind the scenes, personality, people. Showcasing the people behind the business and what goes on a day-to-day basis to a certain extent as well behind the business. Now, those three sections are all important. They all work together. You don't have to take it literally and do 1 in 3 posts in that way. But it's a great way of making sure that you've got a little bit of balance. And if you are trying to come up with a bit of a new strategy after today, that's a really good starting point, sort of brainstorming ideas to go into those 3 individual sections. The most important section on there by some distance is the last third, behind the scenes, personality. The reason for that is because that's where you will get all of your engagement. So whether that's team meetings, a great example. So we work with SASP in Somerset, which is a Somerset organisation around getting people active and getting people arranging sports and things like that. They went for a team walk earlier this week where there was about 30, then they went down the canal here in Taunton and they got loads of photos and videos. That's the perfect example of a behind the scenes post of an organisation that matches what they do as a brand, but shows that there are real people behind that business. That post went down brilliantly, as of course it was always going to. So that's a really good example of where that behind the scenes side of things can come in. Now you may look at the rule of thirds and say, well, okay, that's fine, but I don't want that last third to be where I get all of my engagement. I want the top third to be where I get my engagement, which is the more promotional content. Because of the way the algorithms work on all the different platforms, if you don't introduce some personality and some behind the scenes content, you won't get any engagement and therefore nobody will see your promotional messages. So it all works together. And the mistake sometimes that people make is if they want to be overly promotional, they just think, right, the more promotional stuff I post, the more people will see it. Actually, what happens is the opposite, because the more promotional you are, the less engagement you get, and suddenly you start reaching fewer and fewer people. So you need that behind the scenes personable content, because that's where you get your engagement, and therefore once you've got your engagement, more people will then see your promotional messages. So you are playing a bit of a game with it, really. It's a bit like when you do your driving test. You don't pass because you're a good driver, you pass because you've got that test right for that hour. In this case, well, that's certainly the case for me. When it comes to social media content, again, you're saying I need to do things this way because if I don't, I'm not going to win. And you can't beat these algorithms. You can't beat Facebook or Instagram. You have to do it the way that they want you to. And the more personality you introduce, the better. Now, there's a few examples on these next slides of the sort of things that fall into these individual categories. So the promotional stuff, as I say, is generally a bit easier to come up with. But content on your website, news articles, you can take information from there and create content with it. Testimonials, tips, meet the team features, campaigns. So things like you might do a summer holiday campaign, a Halloween one, half-term campaigns. Christmas, of course, is a great example where you can do a 12 days of Christmas campaign or something like that. And other elements as well. I won't go through all of these different bits for these 3 slides just because of time. So I'll let you have a look at that when I send the presentation over. One thing I would like to refer to is the last bullet point here about looking in the diary. When it comes to coming up with content ideas, the very first thing you should do is look in your diary. And by your diary, I mean the business diary. What are people doing? Where are they going? What have they got going on? And how much of it can we use for social media content? You will probably find that once you've gone through the diary and you've seen what things are going on, at least 50% of your content will be sorted before you've had to think about anything else. Because you'll look at it and say, oh, great. Oh, actually, Pete's going to London next week for this exhibition. Oh, let's make sure he gets some photos while he's there. Or, oh, we're running this session on Tuesday, and why don't we do a time lapse of that? By the time you've gone through your diary, a lot of your ideas will have been taken care of. So that's a really important place to start. And then you use everything else we've talked about over the course of this afternoon to fill in around that. Okay, so I hate to use the word, but I'm going to anyway. Your homework, so to speak, is obviously to sort of think a little bit about what we've talked about this afternoon, but in particular, that rule of thirds idea is to try and plot some ideas of what sort of content could go into those 3 individual sections. It's a really good place to get you started and think about it in those terms. Then look in your diary, then think about the different apps that we've discussed, and you should hopefully come out of it with pages of new ideas of things that you're not currently doing, that you're going to be doing on an ongoing basis from now on. Okay, so I'm pretty much perfect. So does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask of me while you have me? Obviously, a couple have come in on the chat as we've gone through, so that's been fine. But if you've got any questions, please fire away. No? That's absolutely fine. If you do have any other questions, obviously we've got 2 more sessions coming up, so I'll be taking questions during them as well. But there is an aftercare element related to these sessions as well, which we'll talk to you about more as we go through the next couple of weeks. So there is an ability to access me on an ongoing basis as well. But if there's no further questions, thank you very much for your time. I hope you all found it really, really useful. Biggest thing I would say from now on is just go out and try all these different things. You don't have to try them all on the same day. You can do it over time, but have some fun with the time lapse, do some slow-mo,